Are you aware of the different methods of social engineering used by bad actors today to infiltrate multiple different kinds of networks? If not, well, good news is we're going to have that conversation starting right now.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Welcome back to Security Plus here at IT Pro TV, and in today's episode, we will be talking all about social engineering. This is the art of human hacking, as they say. And Wes, you're going to definitely take us down the road because we think, oh, social engineering, it's one of those umbrella terms in a lot of ways, but there are many different ways and avenues in which this could be teased out, as it were.
Definitely.
Where do we begin when we start having this conversation on social engineering?
You know, when CompTIA puts the social engineering, objectives together, they put it in an area called threats, vulnerabilities, and attacks. So what I thought would be good is right before we dive into social engineering, we kind of look at just some basic terminology that you really have to keep in your mind as we go through really the rest of the entire series. So how about we start with some of just that basic, the basic principles, if you will.
Start at the beginning?
That's right, Dan. That sounds good. So we're going to go ahead and what do you say we get started with a concept known as the principles of security? So let's dive right in. And what we're talking about here is something known as the CIA triad. You may have seen this before. Maybe you're not aware of it, right? And the CIA triad is really these three principles, right? It's our goals in security. I've heard people say the pillars of security as well. And that's confidentiality, making sure that only the authorized users have access to the information. Integrity, making sure that the information that they should have access to stays in its own state, right? It's what we expect. It hasn't been modified, whether it's through transmission errors or malicious means, but it stays in the state that we expect. And then finally, one that might be forgotten as a principal security is availability. And that means that the authorized users have access to the data maintains its integrity, but it's also available to them when they need it. So be aware of what's known as the CIA triad. Now, some of the other basic terms that we have are things like vulnerabilities. And a vulnerability, essentially, boil it down to just a weakness. It's a weakness, and that weakness can be in things like, for instance, software bugs. It could be things like some of the default configurations, and we talk about later on in the course the series here, we'll talk more about some examples of vulnerabilities, but defaults, leaving the default configurations that can be checked on vendors' websites, and then people can gain access to whatever it might be, a piece of software, a piece of network equipment, things like weak passwords, right? This is going to be all examples of vulnerability, right? So be aware that a vulnerability is typically some kind of weakness.
Now, that's not the only thing we got to be worried about, because a lot of times these two terms can get a little confused, and for good reason. They're very similar, but there is a distinction that we need to make. So you've mentioned vulnerabilities. What I'm talking about are threats. Could you kind of help us understand what the difference is there so that we don't make that mistake?
Sure, absolutely. You know, when it comes to something like a threat, you'll hear it formally saying any event or circumstance that violates the CIA. All right. It's any condition that leaves you open to some kind of attack. And you'll see that we'll talk about in later episodes things like threat hunting. We'll talk about, vulnerabilities, threats and exposure. We'll talk about all of this stuff, but basically coming down to any kind of circumstance, a capability, or an action that could lead to causing harm, right? And it's information technology, so a lot of times we say harm. It's harm in your business's reputation through gaining access to your data, stealing your user credentials, things like that. So some examples, malware, we have phishing scams where people try to gain access to your sensitive information, hackers as well, all different potential threats that we would need to be aware of.
Now, all of these threats ultimately could make you under, and I think you actually use the term of an attack as well. So define attack so we can make sure that when I say attack and you say attack, we're all meaning the same thing.
Absolutely, we can do that. So an attack is, if a vulnerability is a weakness, all right, an attack is the technique that exploits the vulnerability. That's essentially an attempt to expose, if you will, alter, disable, destroy, steal, or gain some kind of unauthorized access, right? Things like network-based attacks, application attacks, right? Again, it's a technique that exploits a weakness or a vulnerability in a system. So definitely be aware of some of the basic terminology as we move through Security Plus.
All right, so this has been a really good primer, right? So we've set up our idea of security as a philosophy, we've looked at some of the underlying terminology that goes along with it, as well as even an idea into the actual nuts and bolts of the things, that there are attacks and vulnerabilities and things of that nature, typically very technical in nature. But this is about social engineering. Where does social engineering come into this arena?
Well, social engineering, this can be something that it's essentially an attack, right? If you think about it, it's an attack against some kind of system. And let's go ahead and boil this one down. Social engineering, bad people tricking authorized users, right? It's usually for the purposes of trying to gain credentials, sensitive information that maybe can lead people into, or bad actors, if you will, into having access to things that they normally shouldn't have access to. So bad people tricking the authorized users. Now, there are several different types of social engineering scams that we have to worry about, techniques, if you will. And probably one of the most prevalent on the block today is something known as phishing. Now, I will tell you, there are a lot of forms of phishing, and it's just really just slight variations on the term phishing, right? Phishing is an email-based scam, right? This is where somebody sends you kind of like an email that says, hey, you need to have some kind of, I don't know, I'm trying to think here. I think we need you to send us money for Apple Pay cards, right?
That is a popular one.
Yeah, it's a very, very popular one. Just send us 4 or 5 of those $500 Apple cards, right? And we can get whatever it is that we need to get done. Now, there are some other ones like vishing. Vishing is a form of phishing. The difference is it's typically with a voice over IP system. Smishing, we'll talk about that one coming up. Spear phishing, we also have whaling. And then finally, just some of the ways that phishing scams can be successful is typically through things like spam, as well as things that can be sent through an instant messenger. I wish I was making this up, but this is spam, and that's a spam essentially of instant messaging. So let's kind of dive into these a little bit more, because I couldn't for the life of me think about the Apple Pay phishing example. So
I love when your brain goes, I'm going on a break.
that's right. I don't care where you're going, but I won't be there when you
I'll
get
be
there.
having a Coke and a smile outside.
That's right. So you've probably seen one of these before, right? This is a typical type of phishing scam where somebody sends you something that looks like it's coming from an authorized or an authoritative location. We just use an example of iTunes. And by the way, iTunes, it's safe. We're not picking on Apple. These are just the avenues and the methods, right, that they use. The attack vector, if you will, being, hey, this is coming in via email, right? And we're basically trying to trick you into giving us credentials to your cloud-based, platform.
Yeah, I had back when I worked help desk, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I had a guy, he was getting malware installed. My antivirus system was going crazy. He said, oh yeah, I got this email from DHL, said I had a package ready. I said, do you have a package that you're expecting from DHL? He said, no. So why would they be telling you that you have a package ready if you don't? He's like, I don't know, but I wanted to see what it was. And it was just a phishing link. Then he clicked the link, and it was installing malware. So you might not be iTunes, you might not be DHL, you might not be FedEx. That's the whole idea behind this, right? Is to
Absolutely.
kind of use it as camouflage to get somebody to click on something.
That's right. A lot of people don't hover over these links and realize that these links don't lead to anywhere in Apple. They lead to some other Gmail account or some kind of just recently made Yahoo account, right? Now, so when we look at vishing, all right, vishing is just, again, this is a voice over IP type of attack, right? We're trying to gain information out of a voice over IP or even by phone. It could be a hoax, right? Somebody calling you on the phone saying, hey, and unfortunately this does happen, saying, hey, your relative just got in an accident. They're sitting in the emergency room. They need $1,200 to be able to take care of them, right? They play on the urgency. They play on your heart, pull your heartstrings and try to get money out of you that way. We talked about smishing, right? Smishing, again, think of SMS. It's a phishing scam, but it's through SMS text messages, right? In fact, one of our edutainers about a couple weeks back received a text message from the United States Postal Service saying there was something wrong with their shipment and they needed to contact or get some contact information and click the link. The United States Postal Service is not going to be emailing or texting you personally to let you know that they've done something wrong with your package or something that's happening. So that should be a clear indicator that it might seem urgent, you might trust it, the authority over it, but it's not valid.
I mean, the United States Postal Service has a hard time just getting you your package. They're not going out of their way to text you personally to let
right.
you know something's ready.
Yeah, sure. And you know, it goes back to the end user that you were supporting, Dan. You know, they just don't know. That's why user awareness is one of the very first methods and layer of defense. I know Dan's done some security user awareness training here. I know help set that up. And we do it here to make people aware that this is a very real threat, and it's a very real attack vector that you need to be aware of. Now, spear phishing, you're going to notice something that looks the same, right? It's a phishing scam, but now who we're going after is a little bit different. In a phishing scam, it's spam. It's just blanket. We're just going to throw a big old net out there. I think I got that term. I'm going to steal Dan's term here. Throw that net out there as wide as you can. Just get as many people as you can. All right, spear phishing attack is a little bit different because now it's a targeted attack. Now we know that Dan works for XYZ company and he's the admin, and we also see some other people here that are having to log into this specific portal, and we know they work for this company, so we're going to send just the people within that company a bunch of these type of phishing attacks. And again, it's a targeted attack. It's really the only thing
You're
that's
going
different.
after that specific company instead of just saying, hey, you know, whatever I get is great.
That's right.
I like them. I think they got some money, or they got something I'm going to go after.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to target them specifically.
Most definitely. Not just blanketing the entire email infrastructure, but an actual attack against a specific company. Now, you're going to notice whaling here. Well, that's it. Boy, we're getting a lot of reuse out of this phishing email here, because the difference between this, it's still a phishing scam, but now what you're doing is you are targeting the big fish. Hence the term whaling. We're looking for the people that most or probably have some of the higher level of authority within their company, and we're going after them. So for instance, somebody doing an attack, a phishing attack that's, here at IT Pro TV, that's maybe targeting things like, for instance, maybe Tim Broom, our owner, or Don Pizzette, right, our co-founder, right, the higher ups in the organization, because they have a potential to have access to maybe more than the average user, right? Imagine getting access to a CEO's inbox, right? You're going to have probably a plethora, I just want to be able to say plethora, of great information as a hacker.
You see this a lot with business email compromise, or BEC. They go after the whales because they do have that authority and access. Now, if I can take over their account or maybe impersonate them in some way, shape, or form, then I can say, hey, transfer some funds to such and such, and whomever just goes, oh, it's the boss, just do it.
Yeah.
And there you go.
Yeah, and we're mentioning some of these terms. They call that, the principles for success, right? Why are these phishing scams successful? Well, there's urgency. You got to do it now. There's scarcity. 30 seconds before it times out, and you're never going to have access to it again. I don't know if I mentioned authority coming from somebody that looks like the CEO. Oh man, you know what? Tim's telling me I need to send him my some information or a credit card number because he needs to buy something. Well, that's authority, right? That's trust, right? And that's one of the reasons, quite a few reasons, really, that these social engineering attacks are successful.
Let's move on to some other types of techniques that we might see when it comes to using social engineering.
Oh, sure. So we did mention there was a couple more, and you, ladies and gentlemen out there, you're a smart crowd. You've seen this probably, even if you haven't been in IT, you've probably opened email once or twice, and you've seen the spam. So we're not going to harp on that one too much, but understand that in a phishing attack where they're blanketing everybody, they're casting the net, spam's typically going to be the way that they're going to do that. And again, remember, spam and spam, right? One is just going to be a flooding of emails. The other one's just going to be a flooding of SMS messages, right? Just to try to, again, scrape some of that very important information.
But what about farming? This seems to have gone up in popularity here in the recent past. So explain a little bit about farming for us.
Sure. Farming is typically, there's going to be some kind of manipulation of the DNS infrastructure, and we'll talk about DNS a little bit later. Just real basically, remember what DNS does. I type in a name, www.mywebsite.com, and it goes over to the internet. DNS resolves it to an IP address, and my browser connects, and that's all I have to do. If I can put a bad response, let me show you what I mean here. If I can put a bad response in that with that DNS request, and I can tell you that, yeah, my website goes to, and it's a malicious IP, then what we can do is we can tell all of the people, for instance, that are logging into this website, they think they're logging into mybank.net, right, some kind of banking application, they're actually being redirected to a malicious website that maybe spoofed it. And what they're doing is they're farming, if you could see. It's kind of like bringing everybody in to try to gain all of their, gain a whole bunch of just sensitive information from them.
Yeah, watering hole attacks. Another one that has come up quite recently, actually. Very, very popular. If you can pull it off, it's very devastating.
Sure. So, the water hole attack, again, when we talk about farming, right, one of the things that you might do in a farming attack is you might find out by, hey, where's everybody going? If I could spoof one website, what should I spoof? Well, let's look at where all the employees are going. That's where they're all coming to. And if we can make, exploit some vulnerability in that web application, then since everybody's going there, think of a watering hole, right? Think about the watering hole attack where I always think of the Nile Crocs, right? Everybody, all the wildebeest, they're all coming down to one location. Well, why are the Nile Crocs there? They know everybody's going to have to come down and get a drink, and when they mount an attack, it's going to be successful, and for them, it's going to be lunch. For our attackers, it means that they're going to probably do something like maybe even credential harvesting, where they're going to get all of this information. Start out with a watering hole attack, bring everybody in, and as everybody starts logging into what they think is the legitimate website, it's actually a malicious website, and they're storing all those credentials, maybe to sell them later on the dark web, and make some money on them. Dan, I think you were telling me that that's become quite a trend, is like almost like hacking as a service where, hey, if I can get in and get these large pools of credentials, we can go out to the dark web and we can just sell the credentials and make money, and I don't even have to tack anything.
Oh yeah, hey, if people want something, there's going to be a supply and a demand kind of thing going on, and people will be able to make a little bit of money off that. Now, that being said, there are some really tricky mechanisms that are being used by these threat actors to pull off these social engineering. Because we all know, you look at links, you verify that email or the URL address, should I say, before you click on those links. And if you click on them at all, right, it might not be a good idea. How do they get away with clicking or making it look legitimate for an end user?
Well, one of the ways I think of, Dan, here is something that you've probably seen and maybe even done if you type like me. And as you follow us along through this series, you'll see how bad I type. And that's something known as typo squatting. If you've ever typed maybe something like this, where you've typed Google quite a little bit off, well, Google's gotten really good, and a lot of the major websites that you go to have got really good about buying these names as well. But earlier on, there was no guarantee that when you typed something like Google with too many O's, that it would take you and redirect you to an actual legitimate Google site. It could redirect you to somebody's malicious website where they can do for whatever nefarious purpose they're doing, but they could maybe do drive-by download and get some malicious code on your network or on your devices and maybe your network by association. So typo squatting is exactly what it sounds like. It's a little, spelling errors on the URL, also URL squatting, if you will, too, that lead you to a malicious site when you think you were supposed to go to some legitimate website.
Awesome. Now, I know you got a few other techniques for us really quickly, like physical type of social engineering techniques. What were they?
Absolutely. So I know we're running a little bit short on time here, so let's just talk about some of the physical techniques that Dan's mentioning here. I think about things like dumpster diving. You have to be in the physical area. We think of those desk calendars. Any calendar gets thrown away, little Post-it notes that end up in the dumpster. People go through it, and they can actually scrape that information and maybe gain things like PII or use that information to attack your network. Other things are shoulder surfing. Shoulder surfing is exactly what it sounds like, looking over your shoulder, maybe to try to glean what you're typing into, whatever it is that you're working on, whatever application it is that you're working on. Tailgating or piggyback attack is where you have one authorized person that authenticates and two people make their way through the entry. That's where you probably see things like man traps and turnstiles, right, where it rotates and locks, and then the next person's got to authenticate, then it rotates again. Well, that's a way to prevent these tailgating attacks. So tailgating attacks, again, are just those attacks where one authentication, two people are making their way through, usually an unauthorized user. And then pretexting. Pretexting is one of these things where it's more of a, hey, we're going to have some kind of thought of story, and we're going to tell you, like, for instance, when we say, hey, your son, Bill, whatever, was just in a car accident, right, and you need to send us money. I've already come up with that story in my mind, and kind of again, pre-text it, pre-scripted it, if you will, before I even talk to you. So those are some of the physical techniques, and there's just a couple of little outliers that I want to mention. Things like invoice scams that make it look like you've purchased something and you haven't, and they want you to click on a link there, if you will, to try to solve the problem by entering your credentials, and now they scrape those from you. And then a hoax, if you will, is, again, just like any misleading information. Sometimes maybe doesn't directly cause harm, but can be more of a nuisance than anything. And the last one I would say is going to be prepending. And a prepending attack, some of the examples that I've seen before is where you modify and put information in front of a URL, and it modifies where it takes you to. So again, just other types of attacks that you need to be aware of when it comes to social engineering.
Well, there you go. Now you can understand why social engineering might be such a popular avenue of attack for those threat actors out there, because, well, it gets to this machine and not this machine so much. And we are, unfortunately, a lot of times the weakest link. And that's just because we need to understand how these things work. And a lot of times it is just all down to that. That being said, great stuff here. Learned all about social engineering, physical social engineering attacks, principles of security, great stuff. More to come in the Security Plus series, though, so be sure to stick around for that. As for this episode, we're going to call it a day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.